Shabbat Shalom, we are back. That was the Lord's Prayer in Hebrew. I'm going to go ahead and get it in the English. You can find that in the book of St. Matthew, chapter 6, verse 9. And it reads, After this manner, therefore pray ye, Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory forever. Amen, or so be it. And now I'm going to get the scripture for the broadcast, which is in St. Matthew as well, chapter 24, verse 20. But pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. So the reason that this is the scripture for the broadcast, because of course it's called Friday Night Sabbath. We see here the Messiah speaking prophetically about the Sabbath. So we know the Sabbath is not done away with. It actually starts Friday night and goes until Saturday night. Also, because we deal with news, current events, and Bible prophecy on this show, this was a time the Messiah warned to pray that our flight or our time of fleeing from persecution and tribulation happen not during this time period, because again, it's a time that we like to come together, break bread, gather, rest. So what better time than it for the enemy to attack the children of Israel, the remnant that keep the commandments of the Most High and faith in His Son. So going into some current events, news, and Bible prophecy, I have an article here. There's a lot of things that are happening right now and have happened in recent weeks and months. As we get closer to the end of this age and the time that Christ spoke of, all the signs to look for upon His coming. This article actually is on naturalnews.com, August 17, 2015. It says, bombshell, China and America already at war. Tianjin explosion carried out by Pentagon space weapon in retaliation for yuan currency devaluation. Military helicopters now patrolling Beijing. It says here, mainland Chinese dissidents have handed Natural News the following bombshell story. The Tianjin explosion was waged as an act of kinetic retaliation by the Pentagon in response to China's currency war, yuan devaluation, according to dissident sources from mainland China. The Chinese government has put in place unprecedented secrecy surrounding the mysterious explosion, and aggressive police state tactics are now being invoked to control the flow of information surrounding this event. Last week's explosion sent massive fireballs into the sky and hurled burning debris across the industrial area at the world's 10th largest port, burning out buildings and shattering windows kilometers away, reports the Daily Mail UK. The Chinese government's official explanation for the explosion, which has now killed 114 people, is a complete whitewash. China is going to declare regional martial law in the next 18 days. Natural News has learned, in order to exercise total control over the movement of people and information. The government has banned reporters from entering the area and has begun arresting bloggers who promote what the government calls conspiracy theories regarding the cause of the massive explosion. China has blacked out reporting on Tianjin in exactly the same way the U.S. media blacked out reporting on Dr. William Thompson, the CDC whistleblower who admitted the CDC buried evidence linking vaccines to autism. In both China and the United States, when the government doesn't want the citizens to know something, it censors the story across the entire state-run media, invoking information totalitarianism. Both before and after the massive explosion, the Chinese government has been flying black helicopters in formation across Beijing. Chinese dissidents took numerous photos of these helicopters and were able to deliver these exclusive pictures to Natural News. A warning shot from the United States: don't crash the dollar or sell our debt. Chinese dissidents have told Natural News they have reason to believe the attack on Tianjin is a warning shot from the United States, which is terrified that China is on the verge of announcing its own gold-backed currency while declaring a fire sale on U.S. debt holdings. The actions would collapse the U.S. dollar and destroy the U.S. economy, sending the United States into economic freefall. The Rod of God weapon deployment by the U.S. Pentagon, we're told, was America's shot across the bow to send a powerful warning message to China while disguising the attack as a domestic chemical explosion. Timeline of events: China devalues currency, then Pentagon strikes in mere hours. Consider the calendar of events in all of this. August 11, 2015, China devalues the yuan by 1.9%, sending shock waves around the world and setting off a devastating impact to the U.S. economy. And I believe not sure if we covered that. We may have covered some other news with regards to China, maybe not this particular instance. But then it says here, August 12th, 2015, Tianjin struck by Pentagon's secret Rod of God weapon, a space-based top-secret kinetic weapon that can be dropped from high orbit to strike almost any land-based target. The weapon instantly destroys 6 city blocks on the edge of the city of Tianjin, sending a message to China that's eerily similar to the message sent by the United States in the dropping of the world's first atomic weapons on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in World War II. Yes, the USA is willing to drop weapons of mass destruction on civilian populations. It has already done it twice. And just to add to that, twice that we know of for sure, but of course America has dropped a lot more weapons of mass destruction on populations than that. Also, this would come at the anniversary, the 70th anniversary of America's dropping of the nuclear bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which would be a jubilee year of 70. And it says it here. It says, for those following the Shemitah, the dropping of atomic bombs on Japan also occurred during a Shemitah year in the month of August 1945, exactly 70 years ago. This is precisely 10 Shemitah cycles ago or what might be called a Decca Shemitah. So this was 70 years ago that this happened in Japan. And here we see it happening again in Asia, but this time in China. It says here, August 16, 2015, Obama issues stern warning about the presence of Chinese government agents operating secretly in the United States, reports the New York Times. And it comes at a time of growing tension between Washington and Beijing on a number of issues, from the computer theft of millions of government personnel files that American officials suspect was directed by China, to China's crackdown on civil liberties, to the devaluation of its currency. The Pentagon's secret space-based weapons. The Rod of God weapon consists primarily of a kinetic weapon arriving with unimaginable kinetic energy, more than a small tactical nuclear weapon, in fact giving it the appearance of a tactical nuke. And just to give people a visual of this particular weapon, if anybody has seen G.I. Joe Retaliation, it's similar to that weapon that they have where it was in space and Cobra Commander, he had given the order, pressed the button of the nuclear device of this particular device, and it shot out of space and pretty much destroyed the whole city of London. This is on par of that weaponry that this Rod of God that the Pentagon has out in space. They can basically drop bombs from space. And this also goes into Revelations 13 when it talks about the beast who can make it rain fire from heaven. It says here, U.S. websites are now speculating that the Tianjin explosion was a U.S. space-based weapons test involving a Rod of God weapon dropped from orbit. The resulting lake crater in China proves a 5 kiloton blast, possibly nuclear or possibly from a space-based rod from God. Picture to the left weapon was deployed by the space plane, says the unhived mind. So when this explosion happened in China, it left a crater and a lake. And when I say lake, I mean a body of water in this crater. And from the research and things that I've heard people bring out, they're saying that there's no way that a crater and a lake can form from such a chemical explosion that it would, in Russia, they actually showed a picture of a nuclear test area where they had done they had set off a nuclear bomb in Russia, and it created a crater and a lake, saying that that's the only way that would form from an explosion, not from it would have to be from like a nuclear bomb or some type of a weapon, not from a chemical blast. It says here, after looking through the images of the Soviet nuclear test, the new lake in China appears to have been made by a slightly subsurface burst of at least a 5 kiloton nuclear bomb. This was not an accident, and the fracture pattern around the crater proves a sub-ground burst. If it was a sub-ground burst, then a small nuclear weapon is the biggest possibility, because once a nuke has to push dirt, the blinding flash will not happen. A slightly subsurface detonation would explain why camera sensors did not get strange artifacts. And if it was not a nuke, it was something else incredibly huge, but not a fuel air bomb, because fuel air bombs will not leave craters. Space-based kinetic weapons dropped onto targets are explained by Popular Science in this article from 2004. When instructed from the ground, the targeting satellite commands its partner to drop one of its darts. The guided rods enter the atmosphere, protected by a thermal coating, traveling at 3,600 feet per second, comparable to the speed of a meteor. The result, complete devastation of the target, even if it's buried deep underground. When required, these projectiles can be commanded to dive, singly or in mass, at targets on the Earth's surface, smashing into the victim at orbital speed. As the projectile's kinetic energy is released, the blast would be equivalent to a large conventional bomb, explains ArmacPlanet.com. China to declare martial law as total control of information and people kicks into high gear. Martial law will be declared across Beijing in the coming days, dissidents have told Natural News. Meanwhile, the Chinese government, which runs a massive state-controlled firewall that snoops into all internet traffic and blocks VPN access, has added Tianjin as a red flag keyword to its internet traffic filtering. Local police raids have already begun at the locations of bloggers and independent journalists who have attempted to report true stories on what really happened at Tianjin. The Chinese government is engaged in a total cover-up. Natural News has learned that the Chinese government is now setting up roadside checkpoints near and around both Tianjin and Beijing. Additional security measures now in place to control the movement of people include all hotels are reporting details of visitors to the government, including passport numbers, nationalities, names, and phone calls made from the rooms. Tourists who don't stay in hotels are now required to register with local police or risk arrest. The Chinese government has mandated that it must know the location of every person at all times. Red armbands are now being worn by workers to indicate they are serving as a Stasi-like obedient police snitches. The red armbands indicate total obedience to the government, and the workers wearing them have all been trained in how to spot dissident behavior. It's China's version of if you see something, say something, just as was pushed in the United States. In preparation for China's September 3rd celebration for the defeat of Japanese occupation, it's the 70th anniversary. There goes another 70. China has banned Japanese writing in most of its large cities. Government propaganda runs 24/7, condemning the Japanese and the horrifying war crimes committed by Japanese soldiers against China. It's true, the Japanese committed unimaginable atrocities such as mass raping women and then chopping them into pieces with machetes to destroy the evidence. Helicopter patrols are now routinely witnessed across Beijing and Tianjin, where military choppers are flying in formation as a show of strength. Massive populations of laborers are now living in underground dwellings underneath the clean, high-tech buildings of Beijing that seem like world-class architectural achievements. If this war escalates, it could unleash a global currency war of attrition. If this covert war between China and the United States continues to escalate, it would ultimately devastate the economies of both nations. Both China and the USA are currently experiencing shockwaves in their stock markets as bubble economies built on debt begin to unravel. And speaking about those shockwaves, just yesterday, America had its worst stock market plunge of the year. The lowest, it finished the day at the lowest mark that it's finished this whole year, a record. And again, all of this happening right before next month, which a lot of people are looking at September, possibly October, as the time that something financially or economically would happen when it comes to this world reserve currency with the dollar and the yuan and those type of things. Continuing here, it says, in these times of shaky financial foundations, it doesn't take much to topple public faith and unleash a mass exodus away from currencies and markets. It's also clear that the United States considers currency games to be acts of war, while justifying kinetic responses to such events. This is all fully aligned with the government policies set in motion by President Obama in 2011. Washington will consider using conventional weaponry in response to a cyber attack on the United States, according to a new U.S. strategy, reported The Telegraph. The White House's strategy statement on cybersecurity said that the U.S. will respond to hostile acts in cyberspace as we would to any other threat to our country. We reserve the right to use all necessary means, diplomatic, informational, military, and economic, as appropriate and consistent with applicable international law in order to defend our nation, our allies, our partners, and our interests, the May 16 document said. Pentagon spokesman Colonel Dave LaPone confirmed that the White House policy did not rule out a military response to a cyber attack. Even further, Henry Kissinger had the following to say about U.S.-China relations. As quoted from his website, henryakissinger.com, in an article entitled The Future of U.S.-Chinese Relations, conflict is a choice, not a necessity. Just as Chinese influence in surrounding countries spur fears of dominance, so efforts to pursue traditional American national interests can be perceived as a form of military encirclement. Both sides must understand the nuances by which apparently traditional and apparently reasonable courses can invoke the deepest worries of the other. They should seek to define the sphere in which their peaceful competition is circumscribed. If that is managed wisely, both military confrontation and domination can be avoided. If not, escalating tension is inevitable. That was a quote from Henry Kissinger on his website. If the United States defines currency war attacks as cyber attacks, then we may have just witnessed the first application of that new war doctrine where electronic attacks are met with kinetic responses from the Pentagon. Let us all hope this doesn't escalate even further, or America will likely find itself on the losing side of any war involving economics, currencies, or cyber warfare. All right. And if anybody hasn't seen that explosion or the footage from that explosion, you definitely need to go and check that out because it was definitely crazy to say the least, with a mushroom cloud going up in the night skies, and the aftermath that you can see, the devastation that was caused from this explosion, with looking at the miles along of cars that are just corroded from the heat and the blast. Also, they're saying that you have in nearby bodies of water, lakes and you know rivers and things of that nature. You have mass fish die-offs also that they're saying was caused by this particular explosion. So, nonetheless, whether or not this was something that America has done, we know we've known for a while now, and seeing more information coming out to show that America has space-based weaponry that it can launch from space, and this one's showing launching from space down to the Earth, called God's rod, and notice the name that is given to it, right? And again, this comes at a very interesting time. China's evaluation of its currency and all the financial chaos that's going on right now with the markets worldwide. You have Greece. They're what was he, a prime minister, a president, whatever his position was, the guy that was with Greece, he just now is stepping down and resigning. And basically what he's doing is he did his job. He sold the Greek people out, and now he's getting out of Dodge before the stuff hits the fan, so that whenever they come looking for him, he's long gone, because the Greece situation is not over. Also, you had John Kerry come out. I don't know if it was right before this or right after this. He came out and said they were discussing the Iran nuclear agreement, and they said that if America was to renege on that agreement with Iran, that it would all but sure bring about the collapse of the U.S. dollar as the world reserve currency. And he said the U.S. dollar is already out there on the market bubbling as we speak, right? Because we got to understand that they're going to bring about all of these particular events as an excuse as to why things fail. When the dollar collapsed, economies collapse, whatever it is, they had to have an excuse or a reason to point fingers at and say, this is the reason why it happened, so that people will now have some level of understanding and not come looking for these politicians, when it's these politicians and the CEOs of these corporations, these presidents, that are actually the ones behind all of this engineering and manufacturing and setting all of this up, right? So, these are all of the things that, whether it's one big false flag or it's a multiplicity of false flags that happen, that they're going to use to bring about the fulfillment of their agendas. This is what they're going to do. And speaking of false flags, we have a special guest speaker tonight on the broadcast. I'd like to go ahead and bring him in now. We have, and he wanted to speak on false flags, so I'm going to go ahead and bring in our brother and elder lawyer. Shabbat Shalom, elder lawyer. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Shabbat Shalom. Can you hear me nice and clearly?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Loud and clear. Not nice and clear. Shabbat Shalom, elder. Glad to have you on. How's everything going?
Everything is well. Everything is well on my end. But that's for me personally. I can't speak for everyone else. Hopefully everyone else is doing well, and I know you and I have entered into the Sabbath, so we greet each other on the Sabbath with the greeting of Shabbat Shalom. And I know maybe those who are in the States are still in the preparation, so hopefully you're getting the last bits and bulbs prepared before you enter into the Sabbath. But yes, I'm glad to be here, and I thank you for allowing me to be on the show. So I guess we can take it from here.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Yes, definitely a blessing to have you here. First time being here on this particular broadcast, so definitely praise the Most High for you dropping by and sharing your wisdom and understanding with all of us. So I know when we had last spoke, you were speaking of, in particular, I believe it was false flags. You wanted to discuss some information regarding false flags or whatever else it may be that you want to talk about. We'll go ahead and open up the floor for you to go ahead and go into that.
Yes, sir. I appreciate that. Before I do anything, I would like to open up with this scripture in the book of Matthew, the 13th chapter, in the 11th verse. And it tells us, he answered and said unto them, the he being our Lord and Savior, Yeshua, the them being the disciples, his 12 apostles. Because it is given unto you to know the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven, but to them it is not given. So I read this in order to give all praise and honor to the Most High in Christ through the Spirit, or through the power of the Holy Spirit. Because the Bible tells us that the mysteries are given unto us. There's nothing we did special to receive this information. The Most High gave it to us through his mercy and his grace. So we don't take any credit for anything we bring out tonight. And I would like, again, to give all praise to the Most High, Ahaya, Bahashem Yeshaya, the anointed, Wa Ruach Kodash, which is the Holy Spirit, for everything that we're going to bring out tonight, as well as everything that we have touched on and brought out in past classes, past radio shows, and for those that we will do in the future. Now, the inspiration for tonight's radio broadcast, as far as what I would like to present personally, as well as things that you have, I'm pretty sure you've been researching, and many of these things that I'm going to bring out, I know that you've touched on in some of your past radio shows. Well, one thing I noticed when I was examining the different false flags and the different events, even some of those which are true events that have taken place, I noticed the location was mainly in the regions under which myself and yourself, Elder Ramar, reside over and shepherd over. So I thought it would be a pretty neat idea, so to speak, to for us to come together and do a radio show and speak about some of these events. And when I say our regions, of course, under the GOCC Church, under the main Elder Rakash Yar, we have residing elders over different regions, which watch over the several regions and boroughs, and I guess you would say provinces, that exist amongst the GOCC Church. And one of those regions being the Southeast region, over which I reside, which includes Tennessee, Alabama, Florida, Atlanta, North and South Carolina. And I know yourself, Brother and Elder Ramar, resides over areas such as Missouri, Texas, and many other locations in the earth, mainly of which many of the false flags that we've been experiencing and hearing about through the news have been taking place. We all know that a majority of what we're seeing in the news as far as the marches and the protests and everything that have escalated up until this point pretty much goes back, and I'm pretty, some people may take it back to Trayvon Martin, but that was kind of the fire starter. But after a while, that fire died out. So another spark was ignited with the Michael Brown shooting, which happened in Missouri, which is one of your locations. And from that point on, it's just been an onslaught of reports, incidents, some of which are true events that actually happened, and some of which are what we call, and not only we, but those who are experts and those who do research in this field refer to as false flag events or false flag operations. And basically what I want to do in tonight's lesson is, or broadcast, is help us understand the purpose of these false flag operations, how to identify these false flag operations, and how not to get caught up in the frenzy. I was very shocked to find out that there's actually people who study amongst us, who may be new members of the church, who may have not had a chance to watch some of our older work and some of the lessons and information that we put out on false flags. And they see things that, and they continue to see the things that are taking place in these different regions. And some people actually believe that a lot of these things are true. I was very shocked when I found out that there were people who believed that the South Carolina church shooting was an actual shooting that took place as it was reported by mainstream media. And I say I was very shocked because you would think that in this day and age, with the advent of the internet and YouTube and a lot of the information that's out there, and that's not to say that everything that comes on YouTube is correct in 100%. That's not to say that every article you read is true in 100%. But the fact that with all the information that's out there on these operations, I thought that it would be common sense, especially for those who are in this church, to be able to notice these things and see the modus operandi, so to speak, whenever these events take place. But I noticed firsthand that many people were actually kind of up in arms and kind of getting on the emotional side about the events that are taking place. So I wanted to bring this out for those individuals as well as others who may in the future come across this broadcast, as well as the other lessons and things that we have done to break down the truth concerning many of these events. And I'm going to ask you, Brother and Elder Ramar, if there's anything you would like to add or bring in at any point, please do. Please feel free. I do have information I want to go through, but again, we like to try to go by the Spirit. So if the Spirit puts something on you based on something you've seen or researched, please bring it out.
Yes, sir, absolutely. Just one thing that had popped into my head, listening to you speak about the false flags that have taken place in the South, and all the things, that surround those events. What popped into my head was the fact that Jade Helm 15 is mainly happening in the South, from Florida all the way over to Southern California. It's pretty much a whole total Southern operation of military. Not that the military isn't operating and moving around in other parts of the country, but the main focus, for whatever reason, seems to be the southern region. So I just wanted to throw that in with the other things that you had brought out.
Yes, sir, and that's absolutely 100% correct. And that's one thing that actually slipped my mind. Jade Helm, how could it, with all of the controversy surrounding this program? And when I say program, I mean literally, because recently it came out that Jade Helm, and again, I want to put this out there for brothers and sisters who are listening now, as well as those who will come across in the future. I wasn't shocked to find this out, but one thing that did surprise me is the fact that they're implementing a system such as this at this stage in prophecy. And it really let me know how far we are, not only with technology, but as far as prophecy itself. I'm not sure if any of you have heard, but the Jade Helm program is actually being run and operated through a computer system. And I'm pretty sure you've come across that information, Brother Ramar, as far as how this thing is being controlled not through physical military generals and men, as war used to be fought in old times, but it's being fought on a different front through technology, through computers. And it's everything that we've been seeing in sci-fi movies and sci-fi TV shows and things of that nature coming to pass in real life. Things that you would have thought a few years ago were impossible, or you thought that maybe in 20 years, maybe 10, 15, 20 years, maybe they'll bring something like that. But right now it's too early. But with this program, it's basically what we see in Mission Impossible with the precogs and the fact that they have a system which is able to deal with analytical data to determine whether someone will commit a crime in the future. I'm not sure if anyone is familiar with the television show. I forget the name of this show. It starts off with Person of Interest. That's the name of the show, Person of Interest. I believe it's an American show, and with this show, basically the concept is that there's a machine called the Samaritan, which basically is the same concept of Mission Impossible, a machine that's able to deal with pre-crime and actually able to register and see a crime before it takes place. Basically, if your number is called, that either means that you will commit a crime or will be a victim of a crime. And I mean, you would have to see the show to see exactly how far they've gone with technology. Not to mention if you've seen the new Mission Impossible movie and the technology they're dropping in that particular film. So there's so many things that's going on in prophecy in the South region. But I think along with the Jade Helm exercises, I don't think it's any coincidence that those are taking place at the same time that we have the uproar in the black community with the shootings and the police brutality and the heated debates and conversations concerning racism that are taking place in the black community. What I want to do at this point is I just want to get right into the information because I don't want to miss anything. I want to be able to touch on everything in a timely fashion, but at the same time, do everything sufficiently so that you can get edified and receive the understanding. So if there's anything you would like to say before I go into it, feel free, Brother Ramar, or if you're good, then I'll just go into it.
Yes, sir. I'm good. I'm ready for the information. So, at any point, anything, comes into my head, I'll definitely bring it out. But yes, the floor is yours. We're ready.
All right, no doubt. All right, so initially I want to start off with the definition of a false flag. I know for many of us, this term has recently entered our vocabulary. We've just recently beginning to hear about things such as false flags, and many of us are wondering, what are these? Is this a new phenomenon? Or have these things been happening for a long time? Well, before we get into the duration and how long these false flags have been taking place, we're first going to deal with the term itself and what it means and identifies. And this is coming from a book titled False Flags, Covert Operations, and Propaganda by Robert B. Durham, page 1. So the definition they give in this book states, false flag or black flag describes covert military or paramilitary operations designed to deceive in such a way that the operations appear as though they're being carried out by entities, groups, or nations other than those who have actually planned and executed them. Operations carried out during peace time by civilian organizations, as well as covert government agencies, may by extension be called false flag operations if they seek to hide the real organization behind an operation. So just a few lines in with this definition, I'm pretty sure that we can identify with some of the things that we've been seeing and how it relates to this definition. Okay? Operations designed to deceive in such a way that the operations appear as though they are being carried out by entities, groups, or nations other than those who have actually planned and executed them. We can look at what's going on with ISIS in the Middle East. We can go back to 9/11, which is one of the recent false flag events in which planes, according to the report, are run into a building and it's blamed on Saudi Arabians. Yet we know that through research and based on things that are coming out, that this was a Western government-sponsored attack on its own country and civilians. Okay? And we can see the end result, or we're seeing the end results of 9/11 with the Patriot Act and spying and all the different laws and regulations that are being put in place in order to eventually create what they call a prison planet. So it says operations carried out during peacetime by civilian organizations as well as covert government agencies, such as your CIA, your FBI, and Mossad, and all these different covert government agencies, MI5, MI6, okay, may by extension be called false flag operations if they seek to hide the real organization behind an operation. Geraint Hughes uses the term to refer to those acts carried out by military or security force personnel, which are then blamed on quote-unquote terrorists. I'm pretty sure we've become used to things taking place in the earth, and instead of people coming out and stating the true culprits behind these events, or if these events have actually happened as if they're being reported by mainstream media, they'll quickly come out and say that this was a terrorist attack. This was done by terrorists. Okay? In its modern usage, the term may also refer to those events which governments are cognizant of and able to stop, but choose to allow to happen or stand down, quote unquote, as a strategy to entangle or prepare the nation for war. Furthermore, the term false flag terrorism may even be used in those instances when violence is carried out by groups or organizations, whether they know it or not, are being supported or controlled by the quote-unquote victim nation. DeHaven Smith argues that the terminology has become looser in recent years due to the increasingly complex levels of duplicity and international intrigue between states. Some argue that the false flags are methods used by deep states as a form of deep politics. So that's basically a well-rounded explanation of what a false flag is. Now, some of you still may think that this is a conspiratorial conversation or topic that only takes place amongst crackpots and nut jobs, tinfoil hatmen, and guys who think that aliens and Martians are coming to take over the world, and those of that lot. But before we start to really get into some hardcore evidence and things that have been admitted to be false flag attacks, I want to go back to a quote that was made in one of the lessons that we did a few years ago, titled "Desolation of Abomination Starts with False Flags." And this was one of the first lessons we did, really going into false flags and how they affect us as the nation of Israel. And even before this, out in the streets, we did FEMA camps in America, going into 9/11, and how that was a staged event used to eventually bring the FEMA camps and things of that nature to America. But we went into it a little bit deeper concerning prophecy in this lesson titled, "Desolation of Abomination Starts with False Flags." And the quote is, "A false flag is usually perpetrated by someone that have the finances and power to control media or the minds of the people. A false flag is like an attack or some type of terrorism activity in which it's perpetrated by the government and blamed on people to go against a specific group." And that's a quote from one of our lessons that was made by Brother and Elder Rakashiar. And we're going to line this up, and we're going to see if this holds true concerning what false flags are. Now, we've already read the definition of false flag from a book, and we have an example from a lesson that we did explaining false flags and what they are, how they're used, and how they eventually are used to be blamed on people or used to go against a specific targeted group. Okay? Now, for those who think false flags are false, that they don't exist, that they're just conspiracies, I have an article from WashingtonBlog.com. And the title of this article is "History of Admitted False Flags. 42 admitted false flag attacks." So basically, they have a list of 42 false flag attacks that have been admitted by the perpetrators to have been truly false flag attacks. Okay? Now, let me, just give me 1 second here. All right, family. So I'm going to just read a few. Some of these go back as far as the early 1900s. We know that false flags have taken place long before then, but this is the list that they have presented. Now, on this particular article, or within this particular article, they have another explanation or definition of false flags within an image. And it states that false flag is a horrific staged event blamed on a political enemy and used as a pretext to start a war or enact draconian laws in the name of national security. We're seeing that a lot. Things being passed in the name of national security. So now, governments from around the world admit they do it, meaning they admit that they perform false flag events. Now, of course, we're not going to read all 42. We're just going to read maybe about 3 at the most, okay? But you can go and find this list. This, again, is WashingtonBlog.com. Again, the name of the article is 42 Admitted False Flag Attacks. So it starts off with number 1. Japanese troops set off a small explosion on a track in 1931 and falsely blamed it on China. So basically, Japan set off a small explosion on a train track in 1931, and they falsely blamed China as the perpetrators of this event. So it says, in order to justify an invasion of Manchuria, this is known as the Mukden Incident, or the Manchurian Incident. The Tokyo International Military Tribunal found several of the participators in the plan, including Hashimoto, a high-ranking Japanese army officer, have on various occasions admitted their part in the plot and have stated that the object of the incident was to afford an excuse for the occupation of Manchuria by the Kwantung Army. So they admitted, Japan admitted, or the Japanese army officer admitted that they intentionally blew up a train track in their own country to blame it on China as an excuse to eventually invade China. The second one they had is a major with the Nazi SS admitted at the Nuremberg trials that under orders from the chief of the Gestapo, the Nazi police force, he and some other operatives faked attacks on their own people and resources, which they blamed on the Poles to justify the invasion of Poland. So basically, they faked attacks on their own civilians, their own constituents, as a means to blame it on the Polands so that they can invade Poland, okay? Or to blame it on the Poles, the people of Poland, so that they can invade the country of Poland, okay? Now I'm going to skip through and let's get a little bit closer to home for some of us. Let's check this out. Number 7. Israel admits that in 1954, an Israeli terrorist cell operating in Egypt planted bombs in several buildings, including U.S. diplomatic facilities, then left behind quote-unquote evidence implicating the Arabs as the culprits. One of the bombs detonated prematurely, allowing the Egyptians to identify the bombers, and several of the Israelis later confessed. So you have an event in which in 1954, so-called Jews in the land, the false Jews, plant bombs in U.S. diplomatic facilities in Egypt. And they were seeking to blame this on the Arabs, I guess to drum up some type of anti-Semitic sentiment amongst the population and to somehow go against the Arabs. And if it wasn't for one of the bombs going off prematurely, the story that may have been reported unto this day is that some Arabs planted some bombs in U.S. diplomatic facilities as a means to, go and, create a war against the West, whoever the case may be. That would have been the story and the narrative that we would have heard until this day, except this bomb didn't go off prematurely. Okay? One more, it says the CIA admits that it hired Iranians in the 1950s to pose as communists and stage bombings in Iran in order to turn the country against its democratically elected prime minister. So basically what I'm trying to show you is that this concept of false flag events, or false flag, black flag, covert operations is not new. Okay? In fact, if we have time, we're going to go into the Bible and show you a biblical example of a black operation, similar to the ones you'll see today. But moving on to the next point, now that we know that false flags are things that actually take place and have been admitted on a government level, now that we know it's just not conspiracy talk, now we can start to move on a little bit deeper into one of our main conversations, which is going to surround the shooting in the South Carolina church. I'm not sure, Brother and Elder Ramar, if you've done a show detailing this event, and if you want to just go into a brief synopsis of what took place, and if not, I'll just go into it. Have you covered this event on your show in particular? Brother Mark, are you still there? Okay. May have stepped away for a moment, so I'll just continue. But many of you, if you've been watching the news, the mainstream news, and you know the narrative of what took place. I believe this 21-year-old Caucasian male who is named, according to the report, Dylan Roof, went into a historically African American church, a church that was actually started by fugitive runaway slaves. He basically went into this church and decided to sit in and listen to the service for I think about an hour. After he sat and listened to the service, he decided to pull out a gun and open fire on the parishioners of this church. Parishioners meaning followers and basically what we would call the flock. The report stated that 8 people were killed at the scene of the crime. One person in particular was one person in particular was rushed to the hospital where they later died. The police came in and saw the individual, detained him, walked him to the car, and I mean, based on the film itself and how they detained this guy, if you can't tell that this thing is totally just false and fabricated, something straight out of a B-movie Hollywood production, then you really need to work on your spiritual discernment. But nonetheless, I know many of us are new to this, and we can't fathom or imagine that, things can be taking place on such a high level where the news media, which we, for the most part, are taught to trust, and we think that a lot of things happen organically. So when we see things on the news, we can't fathom that the news anchors and everyone, the producers behind the news show and whatever the case may be, is in on this event, that they're actually a part of the act, that they also have a script that they go by. So we see these things and we fall for it and think that this is something that just naturally took place, not realizing that the reaction we give, the initial reaction we give to these events, is the exact reaction that they expect. And some of you may ask, well, how do they expect us to act? How can they predict that? Are they prophets? Can they see the future? How do they know how people will react? Well, there's a such thing called social engineering. And basically through social engineering, you can pretty much shape a society to think a certain way, to process information a certain type of way, to react a certain type of way. Many of you have heard of the Hegelian dialect, problem, action, solution, problem, reaction, solution, in which you create a problem, you wait for a reaction from the people. Once the people react as you have trained them or socially engineered them to react, you then bring the solution. Well, it's the same thing with these false flag events. So they seek a certain type of reaction. And the reaction that they have sought, they are now finding based on what's going on all throughout the United States. But before we get deeper into that, I just want to touch on this real quick, and this is the main one. Even though there's many events we can go into that have taken place, we can go into Chattanooga, Tennessee, which is another false flag event. Okay. We can go into Sandra Bland, which I'm not going to say that's a false flag. As far as I know personally, that event really happened. even though there's things out there that may say otherwise. Until I see something convincing that's able to actually have proof that that didn't really happen, then I'm going to stick to the fact that that took place, and it's unfortunate. I mean, there's many things we can go into concerning this, but we're going to use this one in particular because that's one of the main regions I deal with, which is South Carolina. So here's an article titled 10 Signs South Carolina Shooting Was Fake. Again, the title of the article is 10 Signs South Carolina Shooting Was Fake. And this is from veteranstruth.network.com. Of course, these are people who have studied the events, the articles, and all the video reports and things that have went out ever since this have made its way into the media. Now, they make some very good points. Some of their points, some people may look at it and say, well, that's subjective. But other points they make are pretty good points. Okay? Like, for instance, number one, and before I get the first event or the first thing they put on their list, I'm going to read this here. It says, a 20-year Marine intelligence officer and former CIA clandestine services case officer, Robert David Steele, has reported that every terrorist event in the U.S., 9/11 and since, has been brought to us by our own government. So in other words, he's saying that every event since 9/11, and we can go even further back than 9/11, but if we're going to use that as our reference point, we'll use it. He's stating that every event from that time has been a government-sponsored or government-created terrorist event. So think about that. Think about all the so-called terrorist events that have taken place. 9/11. You got the London train subway bombing. Coming up recently, a few years ago, you had the Aurora, Colorado shooting at the Batman premiere. You had the Sandy Hook. You had Elliot Rodgers, okay, which is a complete clown, okay. If you couldn't tell that thing was totally scripted, then again, you need to work on some deep spiritual discernment exercises. Whatever those may be, you need to work in that, because that event was a false flag and could be identified and sniffed out, okay, as a false flag event from 100 miles away, okay? But nonetheless, we're going to read on. It says, those false flag events have included Sandy Hook, as we mentioned, the Boston bombing, how could we forget, which has been established by mountains of proof. So there's mountains of proof to prove that these have been false flag events. So this is not just conspiracy gibberish. So just jumping down here, it says the key players appear to be especially the FBI and the DHS. Remember, this is coming from a 20-year Marine intelligence officer and former CIA clandestine services case officer. Okay? This is not just some guy sitting on the couch listening to Alex Jones and Jeff Rentz and just coming to the conclusion that these are just government-sponsored operations. These are people who were in high positions amongst what we would consider the covert government, and are coming out with proof and evidence and information to show what's going on in the quote-unquote shadow government. So it says the key players appear to be especially the FBI and the DHS. The shooting of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, and of Walter Scott in North Charleston, South Carolina, both appear to be staged events. And I've heard cases on both sides. The Michael Brown shooting may have taken place, and I've also seen the false flag side of it. And again, I wouldn't be surprised if it was a false flag. I'm not shocked by anything in these current times. But it says, and there's mounting evidence that the latest shooting in the church in Charleston, South Carolina, fits a pattern that provides substantiation that this was another quote-unquote false flag as follows. So here's the list. Exhibit number 1. An active shooter drill was taking place in Charleston, South Carolina at the time of the alleged shooting. So basically they have a schedule from the Federal Law Enforcement Training Centers for 2015 from January 1st to September 30th, 2015. Advanced training schedule by site, updated February 26, 2015. This calendar is intended for federal law enforcement, state, local, and tribal law enforcement. Should visit, and they give the website where you can find it, for a list of courses currently available for application. So basically on this document, they have what is called an active shooter drill, which is basically a drill which presents the scenario of an active shooter. And usually in these drills, what they'll do is they'll see, how do we react in the case of an active shooter, or how do we act in the case of, this type of terrorist event. That's what they do in these drills, okay, supposedly. Now, what happens with some of these drills is the fact that they go live. When they go live, that means that when they perform these drills, or in the midst of them performing these drills, they may take the footage of the drill taking place, okay, because they do film these things sometimes. So they'll take the footage of the drill, and they'll take that and shoot that to the local news program and say that, look, we have a reporting of a shooting that took place, on this particular date, at this particular place, at this particular time, and this is the story, this is what happened. Okay, it's a developing story, such and so shot this amount of people. This amount of people are currently dead at the moment. We don't know fully what's going on, but it's a developing story. Yes, of course it's a developing story, because it's a script that's being developed as you go. That's another story for another topic. So here it says, an active shooter drill on the day of the church shooting. It says Charleston, which is the site or the state in which this drill was taking place, active shooter threat instruction training program. So there was a training program the same day in Charleston, which was supposed to prepare law enforcement for dealing with an active shooter threat or instruction training program. And it just so happens between those same dates, it says it starts June 15, 2015 and ends June 19, 2015. It just so happens around that same date that the Charleston church shooting took place. And again, they'll have footage, and that's the footage they'll play on the news, and you'll think that, look, that's him right there walking into the church. Look, that's him right there sitting in the pews for an hour, waiting to murder those innocent people. Look, there he is about to go into action. And you'll think they got the whole thing on tape. Oh, that's evidence. It has to be true. My eyes can't fail me. Not realizing that the whole thing is a drill in the first place. And that's just footage of the drill. And because you're not there, you don't know these things are taking place, you don't even know of these drills. They can put any narrative or any story behind it and say that this is what took place. And they can get actors and people who, they can just throw in there and give a few sad sob stories and things of that nature, just to make it seem realistic. Which in this case was crazy, because when you look at the quote-unquote family members and those who have lost loved ones in this event, similar to Sandy Hook, when you see these people, they're emotionless. They have no sense of mourning. You know, usually when you actually lose someone that you love, you're gonna have some sense of mourning and pain and hurt. You're gonna be crying and dealing with all those things. But these people, 24 hours or less than 24 hours, the event takes place, they're already at a stage of acceptance. Like I accepted yesterday, my mother was just murdered, and you know what? Regardless of that, it's all about the love of Jesus. Okay, and I believe there's multiple things they're pushing with this. You know, they're making Christians look like these docile, just people who will take anything lying down. That's the image they're putting out concerning those in the Bible. You know, they're irrational people who are so caught up in this trip that they can't even have at least some level of, you know, some level of hatred or some level of disdain for the person who murdered their mother. Okay? So this is there's so many things that there's dealing with this. Okay? And I'm gonna let Ramar real quick and bring in a few things. I know he's been, you know, he's been holding on and really wanting to come in and say a few things. So I'm gonna let Brother and Elder Ramar come in and make a few comments and enlighten you on some of the things that I've been bringing out.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Actually, you know, my apologies. My electricity went out here, so it took me about 10 minutes to get everything back up. But I believe you asked the question if we've gone over the church shooting that happened in South Carolina on any of our broadcasts. Was that a question that you had asked me?
Yes, sir.
I don't know if in particular we discussed that particular shooting, but I know that in times past I have spoken about a lot of those events and the fact that do these events even happen? Do people really even die? You brought up some good points about there was a drill going on, you know, during the event, and when you look at these what we call false flags, it seems like every single one, maybe almost every single one, there's always a drill going on that coincides with the event. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out from what I did hear you say, because of course I missed a lot. I just wanted to throw that in real quick, but definitely continue with what you were bringing forward.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And we were just finishing up on, you know, some of the things we've been seeing with this particular event. The family members, 24 hours after the event, are already accepting that their family members have been murdered and are smiling
Right.
and laughing and happy, and you know, it's all about
Right.
the love of Jesus. Love, we can conquer all things. I mean,
we forgive them, and right, we forgive them, and yeah, it's like who responds like this right after their family just died?
Exactly. You know, maybe after a year or two or something. Give me some amount of time to actually process. You just murdered my mother, the woman who birthed me and brought me into this earth, raised me, and all these different things. And you know, all of that is just in 24 hours. It's just done. You know, I'm totally in the spirit of forgiveness after 24 hours of my mother's murder. You know, it's like if you can't see these things, I'm mentioning that if you can't see these things for what they are, then you really need to work on spiritual discernment. Now we keep mentioning that because a lot of people are getting caught up and they're seeing these things, and you know, people are really ready to take up arms and really ready to fight over these events. And you're doing exactly what they want you to do because, again, it's problem, reaction, solution. They know how you're going to react. Okay? They're waiting
Absolutely.
for you to make a reaction.
Absolutely.
Okay?
These things are definitely designed to attack the emotional, psyche of our people who are simple-minded, who are quick to react off emotions and see things. And I mean, really, when you watch it and you see a lot of things that they say and that happen, kind of, even if you do see it and know that it's not real, it kind of, makes you feel a certain type of way. But you have to, grab a hold of yourself and see it for what it is, and not get caught up into the whole emotionalism of it all, because that's all it is. Is the news is there to make you feel a certain type of way, and then have you react off of that. That's why you look up and you see the riots, you see the marches that turn violent, usually in these situations, which a lot of times they have the agent provocateurs or those who come in who on the left hand side to stir up the crowd and make people turn violent and the loot and those type of things. But examining these events, there's always certain things you look for. The laughter from the people as soon as their family has been killed. Soon after that, they're laughing about it. They can't keep a smile, straight face, or always smiling. Usually, there's no blood. There's no bodies. There's no blood. There's nothing that they show you. They just come out in front of a camera and say this event happened. They may show you a few screenshots of some guy somewhere, but it's never really anything that you can say, okay, this is convincing that this happened. It's always a lot of holes in what they showed that you should be able to look at and say, man, this don't look right at all. This total propaganda.
Exactly. And I can't personally, I have to be honest, I can't really relate to losing a close family member because, thank the Most High that have never happened actually, where someone close to me has passed away. So I can't really relate to that. But I know from personal experience, I can say, not too long ago, I was in an accident in which I basically went over a cliff. And based on that, I was traumatized and still am traumatized till this day and can't really deal in certain scenarios when it comes to close to the edge of cliffs and things of that nature, and that's surviving that. So I can't even imagine someone who loses a loved one, a dear loved one, and 24 hours later they're ready, to forgiveness, which I mentioned, you heard, but I've set the agenda also to make Christians and those who read the Bible seem like simple, docile people who just, accept anything lying down and, irrational. Just don't make
turn the other cheek.
Yeah, turn the other cheek when it's not even, it's not even a situation in which it's awarded turning the other cheek. But I'm glad you mentioned the thing about the agent provocateurs because that's the next phase I wanted to go into with some of these events that are taking place, like in Ferguson with the Michael Brown incident, with the article that I just read. I'm not sure if you heard, but the person who was bringing forth this information, in fact, I'm not even finished with that article. This article was basically stating, as we just read, that there was an active shooter drill taking place. And this is coming from a person who was an ex-Marine as well as a former CIA clandestine services case officer, Robert David Steele. And he basically has 10 things, a list of 10 things which he states proves that the Charleston, South Carolina church shooting was a staged event. So we dealt with number one, the active shooter drill. Number two, the shooter, though purportedly unemployed, was wearing a $1,000 bulletproof vest, which is a very good point. The fact that part of this whole facade and part of the whole image of Mr. Dylan Roof was the fact that he was a poor white guy who just somehow was radicalized through the internet, which is another agenda that they're putting out there, which we're going to touch on later. He was radicalized through these races on the internet. Guy was, I guess you would say, dirt poor, unemployed. The type of guy who just sits home and complains about how black people are just sucking up all the resources and welfare and the taxpayers' money is going into the black community and, that lot, Now, the suspicious thing is the fact that this guy was unemployed, considered to be poor, but yet was able to afford a $1,000 bulletproof vest to carry out this quote-unquote murder rampage. Just something to think about. Number 3, exhibit number 3, the photo of him wearing a white supremacist, or the photo of him wearing white supremacist patches on his jacket was photoshopped. So I'm here looking at the image. I wish I could show it to you all and give you a visual. But the image at the top shows a picture of his jacket with no flags. And it seems as if this jacket actually has an Obama symbol. I don't know if you all remember when Obama had his campaign, he had the O with the 3 stripes, the 3 red stripes at the bottom. So it looks like he has a jacket with an Obama campaign badge on his jacket. That's before the Photoshop. Then after the Photoshop, he has 2 flags on his jacket, which are supposed to be flags representing racist, supremacist, white supremacist flag representing those or white supremacist organizations. Okay, so there's proof that these images have been photoshopped in. Okay, so why would there be a need to Photoshop and place images on this guy's jacket linking him to white supremacists if he was naturally just a white supremacist? Okay, that to me sounds like Hollywood production. And we're going to touch on Hollywood and how your news is a part of the Hollywood production and the purpose of the Hollywood production. Okay, they're casting spells on you. Exhibit number 4. Shouldn't church members have been suspicious of someone who looked like a recent graduate of the MK Ultra Academy? And I guess this is coming from the fact that when you look at this guy, Dylan Roof, he looks like he just came out of a MK Ultra yearbook. Okay, he's no different than the James Holmes at the Aurora shooting and Adam Lanza. You know, they got that spaced out, bugged out look, like they're just looking into, you know, it's like they can see pure atoms, like they're just staring into the molecular structure of the airwaves. Okay? So he says, shouldn't church members be able to see that? That's kind of subjective. I don't know if the Christian church, where they are on a discernment tip, I don't know if they even look at people and read their spirit and see, you know, what intent they have. So that kind of subjective, but we can move on to the next one. Number 5, a manifesto which discloses that he is an extreme racist was not even the work of the shooter. So basically there was a manifesto which was sent to the news, of course, the experts, so they can sit down and study this and see what he was really about and, you know, what his intentions were, which really these are nothing more than Hollywood scripts. The manifesto is just for something that can be sent to the news anchors, and they can sit there and discuss it and make it seem like they are experts on this guy and who he is and what he did and who he was and what was his intent. Okay, I'm not going to read the manifesto. You can look it up online, probably under Dylan Roof Manifesto. But basically, they're stating that it wasn't written by Adam Lanza. Exhibit number 6. Barack Obama immediately moves to use this event to promote his anti-gun agenda. So automatically, or immediately, better yet, after this event takes place, you hear anti-gun sentiments, anti-gun agenda. Usually whenever there's an agenda for any of these events already set in place in which they can put this in one of the categories of the many agendas that they have on the table, understand that this is a false flag. Okay? Anti-gun agenda is just one of the many agendas they have in different categories. If they come out with reports and you hear Obama or one of his representatives come out and just place this thing under one of those categories, understand that it is a part of an agenda and that more than likely it's a false flag. Okay, number 7. Other politicians who support the New World Order are likewise exploiting these events for political purposes. Of course, you have Hillary Clinton calls for tighter gun control after Charleston shooting. Again, they're already creating a campaign talking point around this event. Okay? Number 8, Obama moves to enlist the assistance of Hollywood to promote his unconstitutional gun control agenda. So it says Obama has secret meeting with Katzenberg and Spielberg, Steven Spielberg, the movie director, to talk about guns following Charleston shooting. So already they're seeking to create more Hollywood productions, as if the news is not already a part of the Hollywood production, to gain more sentiment behind the anti-gun control campaign, which really, to be honest with you, we don't really have a dog in that fight. Even though Christ said to sell your cloak to get a sword, we understand that America, Babylon is falling. So if you're looking to continue to uphold your gun rights in America, you can do that until the missiles come. Okay? Because that place is falling. You can do that until the FEMA camps and the FEMA trucks come to pick you up and take you to the nearest FEMA camp. We're not looking to stay in the country and try to uphold constitutional rights like gun control rights in a country that wasn't built for our constitutional rights anyway. Okay? Number 9, pay off the families of the victims by fast-tracking, in this case, $29 million in taxpayer-financed hush money. So they have an article from Reuters which states the U.S. to fast-track $29 million to help Charleston shooting victims' families. $29 million, that sounds like a Hollywood budget. Okay, $29 million to pay off all the Hollywood actors that were involved. Basically, I would say B-movie, C-movie, D-movie actors that they get involved with these events for whatever reason. Okay. Exhibit number 10, more and more, the alternative news is perceiving the reality beneath the gun, smoke, and mirrors. So those are just 10 things that this individual was able to point out and say that, here's 10 reasons why we are able to show that Charleston, South Carolina was a false flag event. Some of them are very good points, others are subjective, but nonetheless, we did get some very good points out of that. I don't know if you have any comments on that before we move on to the next point, which we were going to touch on agent provocateurs in Ferguson, but we're going to skip that. Many of you know that a lot of the looting and the marching and all those things are government agents going in, COINTELPRO types of activity to start up riots and start up fights against the police and to go loot and do certain things to give a certain image to what's going on in these areas. So I don't know if you have anything to say before we move on. If not, we'll just jump to the next point.
Yes, sir. I don't know if you had seen where the Carolina Panthers had raised so much money to give to the victims' families, and that's something else that has to be examined. When you look at these events, and you have all these organizations come together and raise millions and millions and millions of dollars to pay to these families. Like, who does that? Same thing happened with Sandy Hook. All these millions and millions and millions of dollars are always raised to give to the family, the victims' families, and basically it's a way of paying off these people who have been given the term crisis actors. With these people that get on the news and say, hey, my family died, but they're smiling and saying, yeah, I forgive them because, that Jesus would forgive them, and it's all about love and all of this. Within hours of their family dying, that these people are just crisis actors, and this is the way for them to pay them off, is to have these organizations donate this money to these families, these victims. So that's something else that, I wanted to throw in there to be on the lookout for, to kind of show you what this is all about.
Right, exactly. I mean, it's nothing more than a Hollywood budget, okay? They're paying off all those who are involved and all those who are able to make this false flag possible. They're getting in their revenue and getting in their just due, it's all business,
And like you were saying, real quick, it typically always centers around gun control. That's one of the main things. Like, you'll see Obama, as soon as it happens, within an hour, he's already has a full speech ready to be in front of the cameras. He's at his podium speaking about gun control, and Joe Biden, his puppet master's right behind him, shaking his head, everything Obama's saying about gun control. And, it's just people have such easy access to get guns, and this wouldn't happen. And so it's always these things, these buzzwords. You have to be ready for them and anticipate them to say to know exactly what time it is.
Exactly. And even though I did mention that, we don't really have a dog in that fight. We're peaceful men, of course, but we know it's a game of kicking a can down the street. Okay, if you can get one thing, if you can get one constitutional right striked off, and say, we can disannul your right to bear arms according to the Constitution, then now you can start to take away other rights slowly but surely. So we know how it works. It starts with the extreme thing first that everyone can agree with, everyone can look at and say, we do need gun control because there's a lot of events, people are being murdered, people are being killed, and so we need gun control. Okay, they pass laws to take away your rights of your First and Second Amendment, and next thing you know, they'll come up with laws to take away your other constitutional rights. Okay, so we know how that works also. But nonetheless, listen, the Bible says, as the title of this show is, Coming Out of Babylon. Okay, so that's what we're looking to do. We're looking to come out of Babylon. We're not here to defend the Constitution. So moving on, it says here, this is the next thing. After we briefly mentioned the agent provocateurs, but along with that, I wanted to mention the Black Lives Matter thing. And I want to ask this question that hopefully the audience can sit back and reflect on. Do black lives really matter? Do black lives really matter? And the reason why I asked this question personally is because up until this point, I have not seen anything which alludes to the idea that black lives actually matter. I mean, even with this, you're just seeing an ad campaign, a few cardboard posters, and a few T-shirts, and you're getting artists coming out tweeting Black Lives Matter, and these are artists who create music. Their music is based around actually murdering and selling drugs and killing black people. But of course, Black Lives Matter. And one of the main issues that we find in the black community, aside from the murder of each other, aside from the selling of drugs and poison to one another, which is killing us, I guess black lives don't matter in those situations. But anyway, one of the main things that have been killing and destroying the black community is abortions. And I want to kind of switch gears to this because I want to show every aspect of what's taking place with these false flag events and the sentiments and the emotions that are drummed up afterwards by these different entities and these different groups, which you think are grassroots level groups that are trying to rise up and get international notoriety to show the world that Black Lives Matter. But who's really going to respect this campaign? Who of any level of high stature is going to respect this campaign? When you look in the black community, you see our people, both black men and women, who are coming together in agreement to murder their own children and murder their own black babies. So on one front, we can come out and we can march and we can tap dance and do all the things we have to do to get the world to recognize that Black Lives Matter. We can make an album, make a song, or make a movie. But on that same note, none of that energy goes into preventing the abortions that take place in the black community, which is actually murdering more black babies than police officers, because, hey, that's the hot topic. Black people being harassed and murdered by white police officers. So here's an article from theblaze.com, and of course, with any article, there's certain things we agree with and there's certain things we don't agree with. Now, the thing I do agree with that I found interesting is that they're actually using the argument of abortions in the black community as ammunition against the Black Lives Matter campaign. I'm going to just jump down to that part of the article. It says here, I'm going to read this here. This is about the middle of the article. It says, the ones who hold signs saying Black Lives Matter are making a profoundly necessary statement. It's just that the shooting of Michael Brown had nothing to do with it, and the cops have nothing to do with it. And nothing that Al Sharpton talks about has anything to do with it. And none of the business owners whose buildings were destroyed had anything to do with it. Although I'd amend that statement if it turns out that someone set a Planned Parenthood ablaze. So we noticed that people are going and looting and they're rioting and they're destroying businesses, which for the most part, a lot of these businesses are exploiting our people anyway. And hey, you got insurance, you can always get that building rebuilt, but you can't, there's no insurance in which you can get a new life back, okay? But I don't see anyone going down to Planned Parenthood with Black Lives Matter picket signs and torches ready to burn down every Planned Parenthood that exists in the Black community. That would really make a statement, even though, we're a spiritual organization. We're not down with the marching and all those things. But if you're going to come on a carnal, secular level and you're really trying to make a statement, I would go for the head honchos, the true murderers of the Black community. Not to say that the police don't have their part, but Planned Parenthood is killing more African American children, Israelite children, than the police can ever do. So it says, indeed, if you want to protest the one institution which kills more Black people than any other, head to your local abortion clinic. I'm going to jump down. It says, being conceived Black in this country is a dangerous proposition. Did you know that 16 million Black babies have been slaughtered in the past 4 decades? So in the past 40 years, 16 million babies have been slaughtered before they had a chance to live. 16 million. They repeat again, 16 million. Do liberals realize this is happening? I assume they don't. If they did, I expect they'd be shouting about it from the rooftops, giving their great and righteous concern for the fate of Black children. Yes, abortion has claimed 16 million Black lives in the past 40 years. 16 million Black babies have ended up in dumpsters and hazardous waste containers. Black people are only 13% of the population, but they account for almost 40% of all abortions. Abortion doctors kill more Black people in a week than the KKK has in the past century. There are almost 2,000 Black lives ended by abortion every single day in the United States and overall. A Black baby is more than 5 times as likely to be executed as a white baby. So this is where the true campaign should be taking place. And it shouldn't start whenever you get billionaires like George Soros. And I know there's articles out there saying that it's a conspiracy theory that he's funding Ferguson, but there were reports that George Soros and the like were funding the protests in Ferguson. So don't wait until you get billionaires with agendas behind the event to now stand up and say that Black Lives Matter. If you really want to be a grassroots level organization that's really concerned with the life of Black people, which we're going to touch on that statement altogether, then you would have started with the abortion clinics, with Planned Parenthood, with the conditions that already exist in the neighborhood, with the drugs, with the violence, okay, with the music and the entertainment we give ourselves over to. Because, hey, I'm pretty sure that everyone at that Black Lives Matter campaign, if you were to look into their music player or their playlist, okay, and see the music they have in their playlist, I'm pretty sure they at least got one or two songs advocating the murder of black people. Now, let me ask this question again. Do black lives really matter? Now, before we get into that, I want to read this scripture real quick in the book of Isaiah chapter 10, verse 5 through 6. O Assyrian, the rod of my anger, and the staff in the hand of my indignation, or the staff in their hand is my indignation. So this is the Most High using the Assyrian kings of the Assyrian Empire as a rod of correction against the children of Israel. Verse 6 states, I will send him, meaning the Assyrian king, against an hypocritical nation. So the Most High is referring to Israel as a hypocritical nation. Why? Because we're a nation of hypocrites. We'll sit there and we'll allow the murder, the drugs, the abortions, and all the things that advocate the death of quote-unquote black people in our communities. And we'll stay mum. In fact, we'll glorify it. We'll make an album about it. We'll make a movie about it. But as soon as someone of another nation comes in and supposedly kills a black man, all of a sudden Black Lives Matter. That is hypocrisy at the highest degree. Not saying that I support a white policeman or a black policeman or any type of policeman murdering so-called African American or so-called black person. But we have to realize that the other nations will only respect us as much as we respect each other. If we murder and kill each other, how do you think they feel when they come in and murder and kill one of us? They feel they have the autonomy to do it because, hey, we do it all the time. We do it every day. We brag about it. We glorify it. Okay? So the Bible says that we're an hypocritical nation against the people of my wrath. Speaking about the children of Israel. Okay? Now, I don't know if you have anything to say before we touch on the last point of this, which is not only are we going to touch on some history, but we're also going to go into a few scriptures to explain some of what we're going into from a scriptural, historical standpoint.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. A few points here when you were talking about us being a hypocritical nation and the fact that us, killing each other and the things that we do to each other. One thing I like to say, I bring out a lot is we will make sayings or fancy slogans like "stop snitching." Like we're in our own neighborhoods, killing each other, raping each other, selling drugs to each other, but you better not snitch on me. But the minute another nation does it to me, that you were bringing out, now Black Lives Matter. The vaccination clinics, on top of the abortion clinics, vaccinations killing, giving our people all types of autism and Down syndrome and all types of degenerative diseases that just basically eat us away until we die. All of these things that are being brought out in the news and being exposed, and nobody says anything about these facts. And I kind of wanted to get your take. It's interesting that you brought out Planned Parenthood because there has been a lot of news coverage on Planned Parenthood here lately, and I wanted to get your take as far as what you see the reason or agenda behind them bringing it out in the mainstream media, because typically we know 99 times out of 100 if something is in the mainstream media that it's usually an agenda behind that. So here recently, Planned Parenthood has been exposed for selling baby body parts, fetal body parts and whole fetuses, and all types of crazy footage and stuff is coming out on Planned Parenthood, how they're racist, and Margaret Sanger, and all of these stuff that we've talked about for so long. So my question is the reason that they're bringing it out now is because it's so late in the game that they figure that bring this out to either condition them to what's going on, to maybe distract them for the bigger things that are coming down the pike that are going to happen. What do you see the reason that they've really been bringing this Planned Parenthood out in the mainstream lately?
That's a very good question. I think there's a few levels, and that's just based on my very limited knowledge. I have seen the videos, but sometimes it takes a little bit, it takes a few, maybe sometimes a few weeks or a few months before you see another article come out, before you can see the full spectrum of the agenda and why they put certain things out there. I think on two levels that I can see just from what I can assess. Number one, of course, we know that a majority of the victims of Planned Parenthood are those who go and, you know, get their children aborted are African American and, for the most part, Latino women. So I think that that's contributing to a lot of the things we're hearing and seeing in the media with the propaganda campaign to fuel this, I guess you would say, race war, this coming race war, which is inevitable. And a lot of people think that we're putting this out here not to get involved because we don't want the race war to happen and we're trying to stop it. We're not trying to stop anything. It's Bible prophecy. We'll be fools to try to get in the way of the Most High's prophecy. What we're trying to do is warn brothers and sisters not to get themselves involved in the madness. Okay? But that's just one level. I think another level, as you said, the conditioning, because I think that the society that we're going in is going to be so sick and vile that this thing right now that everyone can look at and say, oh man, this is disgusting, this is sick. How can people do this to other people? I think the society we're going into, that, this is going to become the social norm. It's already been normal amongst those of the elite and those who behind closed doors already deal with organ harvesting and things of that nature. But I think in the future, it's going to be so socially normal based on the conditioning that you're going to have just the average, maybe the average Joe Schmo sitting down with organizations such as Planned Parenthood or another organization who deals in the same type of trafficking, asking can they receive, body parts for whatever the case may be. So I think that's part of it also. I know they deal with their thing in which they put something out there initially. It's a shock to the world. But then, later on down the line, they start to bring out the scientific benefits of it, how it saves somebody's life. And next thing you know, you got celebrities dealing with it. And, everyone worships the celebrities. So now if the celebrities are doing it, then it must be okay. So that may be an aspect also, but I think I'm going to look a little bit more into it and see some of the articles that are surrounding that to get a better perspective and a better aspect of why they would allow that out at this point in time.
Con, and you bring out a good point with the society and the state that people have come to just accept things and not really look at it as a big deal. And I would like to see the percentages of our women who have had abortions. So if they've had abortion, they're not going to be as sensitive to the fact of what's going on with in most cases, I would think not be as sensitive to the fact of what's going on with these fetuses because they themselves have done it. Maybe there's no level of guilt. I'm sure there'll be those who maybe would see it and may have them reflect back on what they did and feel bad. But if it's something that you do and you look at it as not a big deal because you've done it yourself, then when it comes out in the news, it's going to be no big deal.
Exactly. And, hey, man, you brought out a good point with the stop snitching thing. I want to go back to that because that's one of the most satanic things that have ever come up in the black community, stop snitching. And I'm saying that because when we as a nation had our own communities, and this is going to go back into the flow of things, as well as what we're talking about with the Planned Parenthood and the vaccines and all these different things that are against us. But when you go back to when we established or had our own communities established as a nation, there was no way possible that someone could commit a sin against the Most High and then look at you as a witness of this sin and say, you better not snitch. If you snitch, I'm going to put a price on your head, or, I'm going to murder you and do this, that to you because you're going to snitch on me. Stop snitching. There's no way that stop snitching could have existed in ancient Israel. If you were caught sinning, then judgment was put upon you. You were brought before the judges, and they would judge you accordingly. And if you were a person who saw the sin and witnessed it and allowed it to happen, didn't snitch, as they would say today, then you were also brought to judgment. Okay? Let me read this real quick out of Leviticus 5:1. Yeah, go ahead.
Not just said and accomplish.
Exactly. You're an accomplice to sin. Okay? So it says here, if a soul sin, this is Leviticus 5:1, and if a soul sin and hear the voice of swearing and is a witness, whether he have seen or known of it, if he do not utter it, then he shall bear his iniquity. So he's supposed to utter if you're a witness to a sin or to iniquity. Okay? Now, who did you utter to? You uttered to the judges of Israel. We know that according to the Bible in the New Testament, it tells us what? 1 Corinthians 6:1, I believe, tells us that we are not to go before the magistrates or take our brothers to the law, okay, before we take them before the judgment of the saints. So, of course, it wasn't talking about going into the outside governments and snitching on people to them, because we can see now they'll come in and destroy both parties. They don't have your best interests at hand. That's not to say if your car gets stolen, you're not going to call the police and, ask for an investigation. But, when it comes to that thing of stop snitching, that's satanic based on how we used to operate as a nation. Now, because we're destroyed, we don't have one common belief system, one common law in which we abide by, the rules of the street basically rule the so-called black community. Which brings me to, some of my points, which are going to pretty much bring this to a close in a few moments. Do black lives really matter? And again, I want you all to dwell on that, and I want you to take it from a biblical perspective. Do black lives matter according to the Bible? And that's a trick question. Let me give you an example. In Deuteronomy 7:6, it tells us, "For thou art an holy people unto the Lord thy God. The Lord thy God hath chosen thee to be a special people unto himself, even above all nations that are upon the face of the earth." That's Deuteronomy 7:6. So when the Most High stated that in Deuteronomy 7:6, was he speaking to black people? That's a trick question. Was he speaking to black people? And the answer, of course, again, it's a trick question. The answer is no. I'm going to say it again. I'm going to drop a bomb on you. The answer is no. Why do I say no? Because I know a lot of you are going to say, well, I thought the Israelites were black. Yes, the Israelites are, quote unquote, what we call today black or brown people. But when the Most High gave forth his laws, statutes, and commandments, he didn't give his laws, statutes, and commandments to, quote unquote, black people. He gave it to the children of Israel. And a point I'm making with this statement is the fact that when we label ourselves with these false identities, such as black, African American, Puerto Rican, Haitian, Jamaican, West Indian, Mexican, Cuban, so on and so forth, we, by default, make ourselves victims of an open season, because you notice when it comes to the Arab community that you can't just go into an Arab neighborhood and commit such heinous atrocities and acts in their community, because there's going to be an outcry amongst their community. Why? Because even though there may be differences amongst the people, they may not all get along, they're all united under one philosophy, one religion, and one belief. So when you, as an outside force, come into the community and shoot one of them down, automatically a child of Ishmael, which many of them will identify themselves as children of Ishmael, another Arab nation that came from the Middle East, they're going to step up and defend what's theirs. Another example, the Jewish community. There's reports in the Jewish community of child molestation that take place normally. In the Hasidic Jewish communities of New York, I'm pretty sure it happens in other places, such as Israel. I've seen those reports also. But the point I'm making is that even though these reports are taking place and people within the Jewish communities are speaking out because there's no justice, when the police come to try to bring justice to the Jewish community, everyone turns a blind eye and say, well, we don't deal with the police. We haven't seen anything. We haven't heard anything. Why? Because they deal with justice within their own community. So an outside force can't come in and seek to bring judgment into a Jewish community. Why? Because they have their own judges. And if they see fit that you need to die or come up missing, then you will come up missing. And no one will ever hear of you again. Okay? Because that's how they operate in their community. So that's an example to show you that when you identify yourself under your true national identity, there's certain things that an outside force cannot do to your community. If we all united and operated under the title of Children of Israel, that's different than us just being black people. Because black people don't have no culture, don't have laws, don't have traditions, don't have history. Okay, black that's just darkness. That's nothingness. Okay? So, again, black lives don't matter. Israelite lives do. Okay? Israelite lives do matter. When I say Israelites, I'm speaking about the so-called African Americans, Haitians, West Indians, Puerto Ricans, Aborigines of Australia, so-called Hawaiians, so-called Cubans, so-called Mexicans, so-called Argentinians and Chileans, and so on and so forth. That's what I'm talking about when I say the children of Israel. Okay? But moving on to our next thing, and this is going to be our last thing before I finish off. The historical side of it. I'm not going to touch on everything concerning this. It's a pretty long article, but this is an example of an ancient false flag, going back to ancient Rome. And I'm pretty sure many of you have heard of Nero's false flag. This is an article. Let me get the website here so you all can go back and read this. This is titled, or the website is www.thirdworldtraveler.com. And the title of the article is Nero, Christians and the Great Fire of Rome. And I'll read this quickly. It says, Rome, the night of July 1664 AD, the Great Fire burst through the rooftops of shops near the mass entertainment and chariot racing venue called Circus Maximus. The flames, whipped by a strong wind, rapidly engulfed densely populated areas of the city. After burning uncontrolled for 5 days, 4 of the 14 Roman districts were burned to the ground and 7 more were severely damaged. It was no secret that Nero wanted to build a series of palaces which he planned to name Neropolis or Neropolis. But the planned location was in the city, and in order to build Neropolis, a third of Rome would have to be torn down. So Nero basically already had a plan of reconstruction of Rome to build his own city called Neropolis, meaning the city of Nero. So in order for this to take place, there would have to be a high level of demolition. Cities in Rome would have to be torn down. So here's the problem. Some people may be asking, well, he's the Caesar. Why can't he just tear down the cities? Here it says the Senate rejected the idea. So the Senate rejected the idea of Nero tearing down these cities and building his own. So it says, then coincidentally, the fire cleared the very real estate Neropolis required. So the same exact sections of Rome that Nero wanted to build his new city just so happened to be the same exact cities which were destroyed by this fire, known as the Great Fire of Rome. Now, I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with what happened back during 9/11. This is a very similar, some things are different, but this is very similar, where you had Larry Silverstein, which was the owner of the World Trade Towers, who took out the insurance policy or made an insurance policy before 9/11 took place, to add within, the insurance plan, if a terrorist event takes place, then he gets covered under his insurance plan. I believe he also took money out before 9/11 happened, just to show that he knew that it was going to happen before it happened, because it was another false flag planned event. But here's a similar example in which destruction is going to take place, or you want to make you want to remodel or make a new building, whatever the case may be, and instead of just tearing it down because of whatever the case may be, laws, regulations, anything that may deter you from being able to tear the city down, you instead create a false flag event. And this is what happened with Nero. Now, I'm going to jump down to where Nero now pulls out his scapegoats. It says, false flag 101. It says, Nero's administration realized the need to employ Salakia. Let me get here. Nero's administration realized the need to employ false flag 101. When anything bad happens to you, even if it's accidental, point the finger at your enemy. So that's false flag 101. Luckily, there was a new cult of religious nuts at hand. Guess who these religious nuts and cult members were? The cult was unpopular because its followers refused to worship the emperor, denounced possessions, held secret meetings, and they were always talking about the destruction of Rome and the end of the world. Even more luckily for Nero, two of the cult's biggest leaders, Peter and Paul, were currently in town. Nero spread the word that the Christians had started the Great Fire. The citizens of Rome bought his lie, hook, line, and sinker. Peter was crucified and Paul beheaded. Hundreds of others in the young cult were fed to the lions or smeared with tar and set on fire to become human street lamps. Brothers and sisters, this is speaking about what happened to many of our forefathers who at this time were being identified as Christians. And yes, the Christians back then, the original Christians, the anointed ones who followed Christ, were being referred to as cult members. And they were the scapegoats that were used in Nero's Great Fire. They were the ones, according to Nero, who set the city on fire. And it's their new religion that tells them and advocates them to deal with such things, because they don't worship the emperor. They don't bow down to our gods. They believe that the world is at an end and that Rome is going to fall. They're enemies of Rome. They're enemies of the state. They are terrorists. Now we can see how this thing replays over and over in history, and they're doing the same exact thing as we speak. In fact, I didn't get a chance to bring this out, but I'm pretty sure you heard about this thing in Poland where they're stating that, hey, we need to chip Polish welfare recipients, not only to track their payments, but also to track those who are leaving Poland and going to join ISIS. So we know that based on the welfare recipients I know, that no one is looking to leave what they have and go join ISIS. Okay? A lot of our people, and I know this is speaking about Poland, but when they speak about welfare recipients and use that language, we know eventually it's going to be brought to America. We know that a majority of the welfare recipients in America are so-called African Americans and Hispanics. And I know our people, man, especially our people who are on public assistance, and not to make any stereotypes, but many of them, they're not willing to get up and go around the corner, let alone book a ticket. Better yet, go get a passport, book a ticket, fly over somewhere in the desert in the Middle East to join ISIS. It's a complete bold-faced lie. But yet they're using these things as, again, methods of propaganda, creating scapegoats for the future, who they're going to use, who they're going to target, and say that these are the new terrorists. So the question is, who are the new terrorists and the enemies of the state that are being drawn up through all of this propaganda? Okay, I wanted to read the story in 1 Kings, the 21st chapter, with Ahab and Jezebel. That's another biblical example of a false flag, if you want to read that story. But let's jump down to 2nd Ezra chapter 6, verse 59 in the Apocrypha, where it tells us, if the world be now made for our sake, speaking about the children of Israel, showing you that the world was made for the sake of the children of Israel. So if the world is made for Israel's sake, then we know that there would be a worldwide scale agenda to target the children of Israel. Okay? Keep in mind, the world, not a country, not an island, all right? But the whole world was made for our sakes. So it would only make sense that a worldwide scheme and agenda and operation would be used to attack the children of Israel from being able to eventually possess the world. Now, it tells us in John 15 and 18, if the world hate you, Christ speaking to his disciples to show that Christ knew that the world was against those who trusted and believed in him. Okay? So the Israelites who believed in Christ were the main target and the main enemies of this earth. If the world hate you, know that it hated me before it hated you. So now, who are the perpetrators of this hatred? Of course, we know we got many of our people, just like in Christ's time, who were the main culprits and the main haters against Christ and the disciples, along with other nations. Okay? But there's a higher enemy. I'm going to refer back to that lesson we had called The Desolation of Abomination Starts with False Flags, in which a statement was made that this thing is deeper than physical man. And in reference to the perpetrators who are behind this, it states that an agenda continues regardless of whose seat or who's in the seat. There's a spiritual plan against spiritual people. So the question is, who are the spiritual perpetrators who are at war with this spiritual people? Ephesians 6 and 12 tells us that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. So now, referring back to desolation of abomination starts with false flags. In order to win this battle, we have to stop fighting each other. Now, why do we make that statement? Because through this, of course, there's racial hatred has been generated. Okay? So when we say we have to stop fighting each other, black have to stop fighting black, black have to stop fighting white, Latino, and so on and so forth. On the low level, because above both of you is an even greater enemy. The elite over the top care no more for the white man than he cares for the everyday black man. He just uses the low-level white man, Esau, at the bottom as a buffering system. Okay? He's just a buffering system to, every time something happens, you point to him and say that he's the problem. When in reality, the guy that's pulling both of your strings is the real problem. Okay? So in order to win this battle, in order to overcome and not get emotionally charged up and really, get yourself in a total frenzy based on what you're seeing on TV, you have to just step back and ask yourself, why are they generating this hatred in the media? What is the agenda behind this propaganda? We know that the chief enemy, according to Revelation, the 12th chapter, is Satan, where it tells us, therefore rejoice ye heavens and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. And when the dragon saw that he was cast into the earth, he persecuted the woman which brought forth the man-child. The woman being the nation of Israel, the man-child being Christ. So the chief perpetrator, the chief enemy against the nation of Israel is Satan himself. He's over all of this, orchestrating this whole thing. Okay? But yet you're on a low level thinking that the everyday Joe Schmo white guy at the office job is here to oppress you. Yes, he may have a little bit of white privilege and a little bit of white pride, but that's all manufactured also. Okay? The guy over both of you don't care for either one of you. If it's up to him, he'll have both of you exterminated off the face of the earth. Okay? But you are the chief enemy, Israel, because you're the people through whom Christ came. You're the people who are here to inherit the next kingdom to come. All right? So now, last point. All right? Very, very last point. How do we identify, or better yet, here's some tips on how not to get caught up in the uproar. Number one, you must understand that your news media is full of liars. As Job 13:4 tells us, but ye are forgers of lies. Your news media, your propaganda machines are forgers of lies. Nahum 3:4 tells us, because of the multitude of the whoredoms of the well-favored harlot, the mistress of witchcrafts, that selleth nations through her whoredoms, and families through her witchcrafts. So Babylon is known for her witchcraft. In fact, Hollywood itself is a form of wood that was used by Druids to make their magic wands. So it's no coincidence that Hollywood, one of the biggest, the world's largest propaganda machine, would name itself after a majestic sorcery or stick that was used in sorcery and witchcraft and Druidism. Okay? Why? Because they are full of witchcrafts and they sell nations. They convince nations through whoredoms, and they convince families through witchcrafts. Okay? Now, another tip on how not to get caught up. You must understand the times according to the Bible. As Christ told us in Matthew 24:3, or better yet, as the disciples asked in Matthew 24:3, tell us when these things shall be, and which shall be the sign of thy coming and of the end of the world. So we have to know the signs according to the Bible, according to Christ, not according to the false prophets, i.e. Farrakhan, okay, who are going to rise up and say things such as, I need 10,000 men who are going to stand up for me and be ready to kill those that kill us. You follow Farrakhan if you want, okay? The Most High ain't telling you to follow nobody that's saying rise up and kill those that kill you. The Bible says, in patience possess ye your souls. All right? So the kingdom is going to be possessed through patience. Not through you just, carnally wanting to go out and kill a few police officers and a few white people. All right? Moving on to our last point. There's many other points you can go to in the scriptures as far as wisdom, but last but not least, the Bible tells us that anger rests in the bosom of fools. Ecclesiastes 7:7 states that surely oppression maketh a wise man mad. So we know that Israel loved to use this scripture and use this as an excuse why they're angry, why they're mad, which is, for the most part, true. If you're oppressed, of course, emotionally, you're going to be upset. You're going to be mad. You're going to be angry. But when you jump down to verse 9, it states what? Be not hasty in thy spirit to be angry. Don't be quick to be angry, for anger resteth in the bosom of fools. So yes, oppression maketh a wise man mad, but if you dwell on that oppression and that anger that comes with oppression, if you make that your existence and allow it to sit in your heart, the Bible says that you're a fool. Why? Because anger resteth in the bosom of fools. And that's the anger that's drawn people up and got people ready to hit the streets and, do whatever comes to their imagination. So with that, I want to say thank you, Brother Another Ramar, for allowing me to present this information on the show. I hope it was edifying to, you know, the audience who was listening and those who may come across this in the future. And that's pretty much it. If you have anything you want to chime in on, I know I covered quite a lot in the past few moments, trying to pretty much just get through it. But if you have anything at this time, you can go ahead and drop it. If not, then I guess we'll conclude.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, definitely want to give all thanks and praise to the Most High for you know you being able to come through on the show, and like I said again, bless us with your wisdom, understanding. It was so much information that you covered. Um, kind of going into you bringing out the last um, false flag that you went into with Nero, and the fact that we're talking about the whole false flag situations that are happening throughout the South. Uh, One of the agendas being racism that they're using to get the people stirred up and emotionally charged. Um, with the Baltimore situation with Freddie Gray and his death, I'm not sure if you're aware, but something that really
Hmm.
jumped out at me was when I looked at the police officers that were involved. There were six of them. One of their names was Caesar, and the other name was Nero. And
Wow.
when I saw that, I was just like, I had shared the information with Elder Urach, and he thought, I was mistaken. Like, there's no way, you know, those two police officers' names could be that. But it just takes us back to the whole, what happened in Rome when Rome burned, and how they, orchestrate everything from the names to the symbols, the dates, how they just use all of this as ritualistic as can be. But these are little things that you can look at as signs of false flag when you see these instances that they just jump out off the page at you. And speaking of the police and the racism and all of that, and you speaking about our people, rising up and wanting, to fight back and be carnal. Another thing they've done in the midst of all of this is they've released the new movie Straight Outta Compton,
Right.
glorifying
Right.
the gang culture. And this is something that me and some of the other brothers we've talked about months back. That this would actually take place right in the midst of Jade Helm 15. That Jade Helm 15 supposedly started July 15th, and then a month later, on August 15th, they released Straight Outta Compton, which, of course, most people are familiar with. Probably the most popular song the NWA put out, which was "F the Police," which is basically
Right.
getting you emotionally charged to fight back against the police. So when they, again, speaking about Hollywood, how you were speaking about the sorcery of Hollywood, and how they use movie motion pictures as a witchcraft mechanism against our minds, but basically using it as a opportunity for the youth who are already. You can look at today's youth, and just the culture is just defiled with our youngsters. As the
Right.
scriptures told us that it's in Isaiah where it talks about the youth, and basically them having power over the elderly, and the elderly being afraid of the youth. But speaking to that, them trying to play on our emotions to get us to rise up against the police and all this brutality and all this killings, these type of things, when they use this, is spiritual, like you were bringing out earlier about wrestling with flesh and blood. This is a spiritual fight. So if they can get you emotionally charged spiritually, then when you look on the news and you see a brother killed by the hands of the police, that spirit may overcome you, and you look up and now you've killed a police officer, and you're wondering, how did this happen? Because people don't understand uh, how deep the spiritual fight is. That you can look up and have done something, and looking around like, how could I have done anything? So we have to constantly peep game and see what they're doing, and stay spiritually armored up to fight. As the scriptures tell us, we have to constantly stay armed at all times, or else we will become susceptible to the wiles of the devil. And going to my last point, speaking about JDM 15, at the beginning you had brought up how, it was basically computer-based simulation, which behind the actual slogan, excuse me, for the Jade Helm 15 was mastering the human domain. So when we analyze mastering the human domain and know that the technology that's being used right now is all about mastering every facet of a human being, what they would call a human being or a person, from all the way from what you can see with the naked eye, all the way down to your DNA, whether it be the social media. You got people crazed on social media, uploading pictures to the internet, the facial recognition, all the way down to the vaccinations and the blood work and all of that, and getting your DNA. That this is what it's all come down to, is they want to completely dominate mankind with their technology and merge the technology into your existence, which, of course, we know the mark of the beast is going to be that tool that they use ultimately to encompass everything that they've created, from the internet to the technology, and, of course, using the military along with that. So those are just some of the things that just kind of wanted to wrap up with, what you had brought out. Like I said, again, it was a lot of information. I don't know if you wanted to, speak to anything I just said, but we definitely appreciate having you on, and it's been definitely a blessing.
Lord praises to the Most High. And, man, there's many things. If we were to go back and forth, I'm pretty sure, man, we'll be here for another 3-4 hours. There's so many things we can just bounce off and go off of each other's vibe and spirit, and bouncing off articles and information and scriptures based on what we're saying. But you know what? I'm gonna leave it with that, with your closing statements, which were some great points. And if there's anything else that is there any calls or anything of that nature that we do, or all right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We definitely have the callers. Definitely, I'm sure they would like to speak to you. So if you have time to take some calls, we definitely can go into our next segment, which is the calls.
Okay, no doubt.
So, brothers and sisters, again, we have our special guest on tonight, Elder Lawyer.